All right, today we're diving into something pretty incredible, a deep, scholarly analysis of a single, highly controversial word in the Quran. It's just one word, but as we're about to see, how you interpret it changes absolutely everything.
So, this is the verse at the very heart of the debate, Quran 4:34. For centuries, that key phrase, DaRaBa them, has traditionally been translated as beat them or strike them. The analysis we're exploring today puts that translation under a microscope and asks a really crucial question. Is that interpretation actually consistent with the rest of the Quran's language, its ethics, and its laws?
Okay, so here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at why the verse is so controversial. Then, we'll get into the really fascinating part, the linguistic clue hidden in the word DaRaBa itself. After that, we'll walk through the contradictions the traditional meaning creates, explore a much more coherent alternative, and finally wrap up with the broader principle of justice that's really at stake here.
Right, so let's just set the stage. The traditional take on this verse creates a massive ethical and legal puzzle. And the whole point of the analysis we're reviewing is to see if there's another way to read it, one that actually fits together with the rest of the text. This brings us to the core of the argument, and honestly, this is where it gets really interesting. It all comes down to a linguistic clue, a deep dive into the word DaRaBa itself.
So the source makes it clear that DaRaBa is not a simple, one-size-fits-all word. Like a lot of words in classical Arabic, it's incredibly flexible. Yes, it can mean to strike, but it can also mean things like to present a case or to cite an example. And according to this analysis, the key to figuring out which meaning is intended lies in a tiny but crucial grammatical detail.
And here it is. This is the central linguistic argument of the whole piece. It says that when the Quran uses DaRaBa to mean a physical hit, it almost always follows it with the little preposition be, which means with or by. But, and this is the kicker, in verse 434, that preposition isn't there. It uses DaRaBa with a direct object, a grammatical structure that the source argues is used consistently everywhere else in the Quran to mean to put forth, to present, or to cite.
Okay, so once you have that linguistic key, the analysis starts building its case by showing how, if we stick with the traditional beat them translation, a bunch of major contradictions just pop up all over the place.
The first big one is a clash with a core Quranic idea, the principle of justice and, making sure punishment actually fits the crime. And the source asks this really sharp question. The verse doesn't say if your wives are disloyal. It says, as for those you fear their disloyalty. Think about that. The Quran says over and over again that punishment has to be proportional, and it can only come after a wrong has been proven. So the article argues prescribing a physical action based on just a suspicion, well, it seems to fly in the face of that core legal principle.
Okay, next. The analysis finds another glaring problem when you compare this verse to the Quran's own rules about marriage and divorce.
The source brings up this other verse, which is crystal clear. It explicitly tells men not to harm or cause distress to their ex-wives during the waiting period after a divorce. The whole emphasis is on kindness, even when a relationship is ending.
And this just lays the ethical paradox bare, right? Does it make any sense that a man is forbidden from harming a woman he has already divorced, but is somehow permitted to physically harm the woman who is still his wife? The source argues this interpretation basically turns the Quran's moral compass completely upside down.
The third contradiction is a big one. It's a direct clash with the Quran's very own legal procedures for dealing with infidelity. This is just fascinating. The source points out this legal paradox. See, the Quran already has a formal, step-by-step process for when a husband accuses his wife of infidelity. It involves oaths, it involves a judge, it does not involve unilateral punishment. So this creates a totally bizarre situation. The traditional reading suggests a man can punish his wife on a mere suspicion, but if he had enough proof to make a formal accusation, he'd have to follow a nonviolent legal path. It just doesn't add up. So after laying out all these linguistic, ethical, and legal problems, the source doesn't just leave us hanging. It offers a solution, an alternative reading that, it argues, makes all of these contradictions simply disappear.
And here it is. Instead of strike them, the analysis argues that DaRaBa hana should be translated as cite them or present their case, as in take the issue to a third party, an authority. And remember that grammatical rule we talked about? This translation aligns perfectly with it. It's DaRaBa with a direct object, meaning to present or put something forth.
Now watch what happens when we plug this new meaning back into the verse.
The sequence of actions becomes this logical, escalating, and totally nonviolent process for solving a conflict. First, you advise. If that doesn't work, you create some distance. If that still doesn't work, you escalate the matter by citing them to an authority. And this flows beautifully, seamlessly, into the very next verse, 435, which says, if you fear a split, then appoint an arbitrator from each family to mediate. The solution is literally built right into the text.
So let's just zoom out for a second and look at the conclusion. What are the bigger implications of all this for understanding the principle of justice in the Quran?
Well, the source concludes that this alternative interpretation does way more than just fix one tricky verse. It makes the whole system coherent. It upholds the linguistic rules of the Quran, it resolves all those legal and ethical knots we just talked about, and it lines up perfectly with the bigger Quranic themes of justice, kindness, and, repelling evil with goodness, not with more harm.
This quote from the source really just sums up the whole driving force behind the argument. The idea here is that the Quran's purpose isn't to create rules that allow for oppression, but actually to give people a framework to dismantle oppression and establish justice.
And this leaves us with a final, really powerful thought. This entire complex analysis all hinges on challenging the translation of a single word. It just goes to show how profoundly our understanding of a text can shift when we're willing to re-examine its language and demand that it be internally consistent. It's a powerful reminder that interpretation is everything, and that the search for meaning is a conversation that's never really over.